saying it's going live. Right. Says we're going live and private chat's open. So lovely. We should be live on my page shortly.
Just waiting.
So while we're just waiting for technology to catch up with what we're doing, if you've just joined us, welcome. We're here this evening with Carolina from Chewing River. Very excited to be talking to her. We have a canine nutrition consultant, and this is a topic that's very, very important to me. Izzy really hasn't been too well with all sorts of stomach issues of late. And I've been working with Carolina with Izzy for a few months now, and the difference in her is just fantastic. It's made such a difference. So I asked her if she'd come to a live with us and have a chat with us, and she thrilled that she has. So just while the girls get themselves live, I will tell you who we're on with. So those of you that are familiar with our Facebook Lives will know Sarah from Berkshire Dogs Training. Sarah works with puppies and dogs of all ages, all breeds, all types.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You name it, Sarah can cover you. And as I say, we're here with, very excited to introduce Carolina from Chewing River, who I've been working with personally with Izzy. And Izzy's my ex-racing greyhound. I'm from Insight Hounds, if you don't know me. I'm Claire, hello. And Insight Hounds works with all sight hounds, but a lot of our work is with ex-racing greyhounds. So I think my WhatsApp feed to Carolina is full of photos of dog poo. If anybody ever looked at it, they would think we have a very strange relationship because there's lots of things about dog food and photos of dog poo. So I haven't quite got a feed like that with anybody else or a chat like that with anyone else. But
at least you give me a bit of a warning to make sure I'm not having my lunch or my tea. So that's appreciated.
Occupational hazard.
So, ladies, are you up and running on your pages? Are we good to go? Fantastic. So, right, what we're going to do today is we've got some questions that have come in advance or that we've wanted to ask ourselves or have come in from our members, our customers. So Sarah and I are going to work through those. If you have any questions you want to ask yourself, please pop them on my page and we will do our best to ask Carolina to answer them. If we don't get around to anything today, we will please get in touch with us and we can answer them at a later date. So without further ado, I think, Sarah, you've got our first question.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm often asked by guardians about, raw being very dominant in the, news, it's supposed to be the best thing possible, but the convenience of it, the thought of getting an extra freezer, to fulfill it, the cost of it can sometimes put people off. The functionality and the flexibility of kibble could be really, really appealing. And, not understanding the difference and the benefits, I've been very open about it. I feed my dog a kibble diet, but I do supplement it with various things. So that's my understanding because I'm here to learn as much as everybody else to understand that, I'm doing the best thing possible. But I thought it was a good question to ask because I know it's a very complex subject, Carolina, but maybe you can just simplify it for our audience, just to say, raw kibble, what's your recommendation?
Yeah, I will try my best to simplify it because I think that question alone we could probably talk about for hours and hours. But I think first and foremost, what I want to say is if you do feed kibble, this session is not to make you feel guilty about feeding kibble, is not to shame you about feeding kibble. We're going to be talking about some of the pros and cons. But I want to make it very, very clear that even though I raw feed, I'm an advocate for fresh feeding, that doesn't mean that I won't work with someone that uses kibble, because we've got to be realistic about the human side of the lead as well. And it's not always accessible to fresh feed for various reasons. People might not want to fresh feed, and that is okay as long as we're making that decision based on good information. And hopefully I can share some of that information with you today. So I tend to explain this to clients on a sliding scale. So if you imagine one end of that scale is the most processed diets and the other end of the scale is the least processed diets. So on the most processed side, you're going to have diets like semi-moist, dry extruded, which is your kibble, air dried, canned diets. So these are the diets that will often have the ingredients that were perhaps already processed before they've even gone into that recipe. So things like your meat meals, your animal derivatives, and these are, generally speaking, the leftovers of meat production. Things can sometimes be feathers, beaks, etc. That are processed at high heats and then ground into powder or mixed into almost kind of gooey type consistency. And then mixed with the other ingredients of that recipe. And that can be rice, flours, potatoes, other vegetables, and that is then processed at high heat again. So we're talking a minimum of 2 heat processes. Different types of foods will have different temperatures as well, but generally speaking, trying to really simplify as much as possible, you're talking about foods that have been processed at 160 to 200 degrees multiple times. Now, every time a food goes through a heat process, it almost loses some of that nutrition. So the more processed the food is, the more inflammatory it's going to be, and the least nutritions is going to be. And again, I'm trying to really, really simplify it here, because otherwise I could talk about for hours just about the heat process on their own. But if people want to find out more about this side of things, I can recommend a few books and stuff. If you really want to geek out. So that's kind of the more processed side. And then if we look at the least.
I'm just going to say it's very much like when we have, you might get a takeaway, and then we reheat it because we've had too much, or etc. That the nutritional value in that takeaway, because of the processing that it's gone through, and therefore then you're reheating it, it becomes less and less nutritional. The logic is there for in the same process, I guess, in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Or a little bit like, when we steam our vegetables. And I think this is something that most people will know, that when you cook your vegetables, you're losing some of the nutrients. So I think most people will be able to be like, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. You heat the food up, it does lose some nutrients, etc., etc. So that's kind of the processes, the temperature, the heat processes, and then we introduce that idea of that inflammation that can cause within the dog. So then on the least processed side, we're looking at foods such as your dehydrated, your freeze-dried, your gently cooked, your commercial raw, and your homemade. And this is where the fresh ingredients are the least processed. So some of them might only be mechanically processed, for example, by being ground into a mince. Others might be going through a heat process that is maybe under 100 degrees. So again, the difference in temperature is very different. So instead of going really high, long heat processes, we're going low and slow as well. So again, retaining a lot more of that nutrition. So that's kind of the sliding scale. And obviously you can go for whatever works for you within that sliding scale, as long as you understand that you are the only person that can make that decision. Because you can decide to eat takeaways every day, but you can decide, because you understand the consequences of that. Your dog is not able to make that decision. You are their guardian. You are responsible for making that decision for them and to try to provide them with the best that you can. So trying to understand the different types of foods, I think, is important, so you can make an informed decision. So I mentioned the homemade diets. I think this is where a lot of the scaremongering can start when it comes to fresh feeding. I think There's a lot of even pet professionals that will say, oh God, no, you can't possibly do a homemade diet because it's not going to be balanced. There's this obsession with a balance. It's not going to be complete. It's not going to have all the nutrients that the dog needs. What I tend to say to people is simplify things. We don't cook for ourselves, for our children, knowing exactly how much iron we're taking, how much manganese, how much vitamin C, etc., etc. Like, we just don't feed ourselves that way. And although, of course, it is important to be very mindful of nutrient deficiencies and making sure that we're supporting the dog's nutritional needs, I also think that people do overcomplicate it a lot, and they make fresh feeding a lot more difficult than it needs to be. Because the reality is, in most cases, I will say this very careful because I really want to make sure that it's not misconstrued. But in most cases, a fresh diet is going to be miles better than a kibble diet. In most cases. Not all.
Yeah.
There are some really bad homemade diets. I've seen people very proud showing off their own recipe, and then I'm reading through it and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is awful. But if people are able to take a little bit of time informing themselves about the basics of canine nutrition, I'm not expecting anyone to go out there and become an absolute professional and do like a 1-year course or whatever it is, but just looking at information from different websites, from different sources, and just trying to simplify things, a homemade diet can be accessible. It can be a bit time consuming, but if you've got the time, like if I had the time to cook for River, I'd cook for River every single day. But I haven't even got the time to cook for myself every day. So, this is where that accessibility needs to be kind of taken into consideration. So what I'd say is simplify things. Think about variety, because variety really is key.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example of this. So if we're feeding beef liver, that can contain approximately 4.9 milligrams of iron. If we're feeding pork liver, that can be 23.3 milligrams of iron.
Wow.
So they're both liver, but just from different animals, you can see the difference. And for vitamin C, the same animal, beef and liver, we've got beef 1.3 milligrams, pork, we've got 25.3 milligrams of vitamin C. So again, a huge difference really. So variety is key. Unless your dog has got health issues, food intolerances, etc.
Yeah.
Variety is what you want to aim for, very much like our own diets. We might have a bit of fish today, we might have some chicken the next day, and then maybe we have a vegetarian diet another day or whatever. Like, not me, because I love my meat too much, but we change it up because we get bored of the same stuff as well otherwise.
Totally. So I think it sounds like when I was working in the corporate world, I'd have to prep my meals on a Sunday so that I had like at least up to Thursday prepped, ready in the fridge or in the freezer, just to make my life simpler. And I think, that, made my life a lot more efficient. And I think it's a case of, bit of planning ahead at the weekend with your own meals and, cooking a squash or some veggies and stuff in addition for what you might be using. And for them, it actually might be the easiest way I can see implementing it, a bit easier, at complementing that diet.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a really good point in terms of like doing your own meal prep, because actually a lot of the stuff that you're preparing for yourself, the majority of the time is actually going to be suitable for your dog. So say, for example, if you were roasting loads of vegetables, so you're chopping up all these different vegetables, actually you could keep a little portion of that back, and that can be the vegetables that you're going to lightly steam to offer to your dog instead. So there are really easy ways that you can improve your dog's bowl. So adding fresh foods to their bowl is the easiest way of doing that. So a little bit of the veg that you've prepared for yourself, maybe a little bit of meat that you've had left over, whatever it might be, raw or cooked or whatever you've got. Up to 10% of their daily allowance can be made up of fresh foods. So you obviously want to be mindful that you don't want to be overfeeding the dog. So you want to be mindful of the quantity that you're feeding. But again, given that your dog's got no allergies, no food intolerances, no health issues, add some fruit, add some veg, some herbs and spices. That can be a really, really powerful way of boosting their nutrition. And it can also be quite financially viable because it can be stuff that you've already got in the fridge or in the cupboard as well. The other thing that I would say, which is another easy way to boost your dog's diet, is hydration, especially if your dog is kibble fed. Kibble is incredibly dehydrated because of all these heat processes that food goes through. So most kibble fed dogs are in this chronic state of dehydration. So for me, it's an absolute non-negotiable that you add water to that dog's bowl.
Okay, really.
Water is a good starting point. Do you want to go a bit of step further? Maybe a little bit of bone broth. You can make bone broth really easily yourself if you've got a slow cooker. You can buy really high quality bone broths. So Carnley is the brand that I recommend. You can get it on Amazon. Most pet shops stock it as well. Really good quality bone broth, and you can add that to the dog's bowl again. So we're just bringing more nutrients. We're bringing some more good stuff to that bowl, and we're just giving the dog that little boost. Muscle meat, so a bit of chicken breast, a bit of steak, a bit of liver, maybe some kefir, some raw
I can hear some of my clients going, God, this dog's going to eat better than me. I totally get it, and I think it's brilliant, and I really can see how complex and how confusing it can be for clients, and it's for that reason alone, I think it's been fantastic having this resource and this opportunity to make that connection with you, Carolina, because I think there's lots of opportunity for clients. We'll talk about how they can get in touch with you afterwards to know more about it, but you've done a great summary in regards to explaining what the benefits are and how to complement a kibble diet if practicalities doesn't allow us to not to go full raw or cooked in that sense.
Yeah, that's great.
And like
Thank you, ladies.
Sorry, Claire, just a really quick point before we move on to the next question. I think it can be as complicated or as simple as you want it to be, but the possibilities really are endless. So just remind yourself that it's not necessarily about, oh, my dog eats better than me. So I used to say this, and I used to be almost proud, being like, oh, my dog eats better than me. And then I'm like, hang on a second, let me think about what message am I promoting here? Yeah. Actually, especially being a mental health professional as well, that's my background, that's my career. I don't want anybody to feel like they are missing out because they're just spending all their money and all their time on their dogs. Because if we can't look after ourselves and we can't be the best version of ourselves, we're not going to have the capacity to be there for our pets. So it's not so much about my dog eats better than me, but it's what can I learn to improve my well-being and my dog's. Let's work on both sides of the lead again. Because I have seen, unfortunately, people just spending all their money on their dog and then living off pot noodles. And I'm like, mate, this is great, but what is your dog going to outlive you? There's got to be a balance. We've got as much as we love our pets, we've got to look after ourselves as well. So I
think, and I love that you've used
on that pot noodle note, Claire. When we go straight into your
I was going to say
line from the live tonight, isn't it?
It's great. And pot noodles, we were saying, almost like, I think as humans, we know if you say pot noodle, that's not got loads of nutritional value to us. We know that, and the difference between like a home cooked meal maybe compared to that, we know. But sometimes with our dogs, we don't always make those same connections. No. But it is similar things, isn't it? Just when you were talking about sort of the nutrition, it is important if your dog does have any sort of health conditions. I have put it in the comments about seeking advice before you go on to any particular diets, because I know at the moment, kind of working with you with Izzy, we definitely wouldn't be putting loads of fruit and veg in Izzy's diet at the moment, because that wouldn't be right for her with her underlying issues. So we'll talk a bit more about that at the end, but there is a little disclaimer in the comments just to explain about individual dogs and circumstances, and the topics we're discussing are for information purposes. So next question. That was great, thank you. This is something that I've been around sort of the greyhound world for over 15 years now, and something that I've heard a lot on repeat is that an ex-racing greyhound shouldn't have more than 20% protein in their diet. It has to be less than 20% protein. You have to find a kibble that's less than 20% protein. Otherwise, your dog's going to be hyperactive and mental. So, and this has been going around for a long time, and we're going to talk about it in a little bit more detail in a moment. But I've been contacting lots of people about this to see if we can find the origin of this information. The kind of Zoomy Zone have been fantastic in giving me advice and where they've gone with it, and we can't seem to find the origin of this myth, but it is out there, it's widely known and it's widely used. But can you give us a bit more information on that, please, Carolina?
Yeah, so this one really threw me because somehow I'd never heard this myth, especially in my dog training practice. Like, I've worked with Insight Hounds before, I'd worked with greyhounds before, never once. And people normally will, because they know that I do the nutrition stuff as well, they will ask me, oh, what do you think, should I feed my dog? Never had once heard this, right? So this really threw me. But I have searched high and low. I cannot find any sources or studies that give me any logical reason as to why a greyhound needs a low protein diet. I think you could probably go around the houses and you could probably find ways to try to explain it away, because I think, especially with the joys of social media, there's always someone that can explain anything away. But I think if we simplify things, go to the very basics of what we know even about human nutrition. We know that high quality protein supports muscle development, tissue repair, it can maintain energy levels. So we see our athletes eat. They don't eat a high carb, low protein diet, do they? We have heard once, again and again, about the benefit of things like keto diets, for example, high protein, low carb. So we know, even from the human nutrition side of things, that protein is nutrition, right? So same applies to the dog. Protein is a crucial part of the dog's diet. I am yet to meet a dog who hasn't thrived on a high protein diet. So talking about my practice and my experience, I have met many dogs that have been incredibly ill because they have been on high carb diets. I have not met a single dog that has been ill because they were on a high protein diet. So for me, that's it. I can't find the studies, I can't find the research, and I can't find examples in my practice that would support the hypothesis of 20% or less is what you need to feed. Now, we know protein is good, we know it supports with muscle development, etc., etc. If a dog is a working dog, regardless of breed, they are going to need more energy because they are going to exhaust more energy as well. Yes, if a dog retires, they then need less energy. That's, pretty obvious. I think everyone can follow so far. That doesn't mean, though, that the quality of the diet needs to worsen just because they've stopped working. So we still can keep a high quality protein diet, and we maybe adjust the quantity of the food. Okay. Maybe we look at proteins that are a bit more lean. So lamb, for example, is a fattier protein. Maybe that would be a better protein for a working dog. Maybe venison will be best for a retired dog because it's more lean. So you can start thinking about the fat content, etc. But honestly, normally quantity, adjusting the quantities alone will suffice. Again, if we're talking about a healthy dog, if the dog's got health issues, different conversation. But if we then go back to greyhounds, naturally quite lean dogs, quite muscular. Some can have quite fast metabolisms as well, so they can burn through that food quite quickly. So this is an issue that we've had with Izzy. So she was struggling to put on weight. We've had to increase her food more than a dog that her age, her health issues from a different breed, just because of metabolism is so fast. So if your dog is struggling to put on weight, you can feed them more. Again, pretty kind of basics, right? There's one study as well that I was able to find that looked at racing greyhounds and actually found that the sample that were fed higher protein diets had overall better performance than the ones that were on low protein diets. So actually that study shows us that the higher protein was better for the dog's performance. But, and this is the problem with a lot of the studies out there on canine nutrition, this was a study that used kibble. It's a study that used kibble-fed dogs. And as we've talked about before with Sarah's question, we already know that bioavailability of the nutrients in a kibble diet is already compromised.
Yeah.
So if even on a kibble-fed diet, these dogs still performed better with more protein, then we can kind of see that maybe the protein is a good, not a bad thing. But obviously that was when they were still working. And I think part of this myth is like once they've retired. But honestly, I can't find a link. I can't find the studies. I can't find a logical argument or research to support that there's a need to feed low protein diets to greyhounds or any other breeds. Breed specific diets are probably one of the biggest scams of pet food industry. And the other thing that I wanted to note on this as well, because we're talking about research, there's very, very poor independent research on dog food. Most of the dog food, is this discussing raw food or highly processed? Sorry, Daniela, I don't know what you mean. The low protein, the myth of the low protein for greyhounds, I think is normally kibbles that use that sell kibble. So someone will sell a kibble that says greyhound kibble 20% or less. So yeah, that's more like on the process side of things. But yeah, the research, like I said, normally funded by the kind of big kibble companies. So, you know, how much can we trust those results, I think, is also a question we need to be asking. And this is why I think projects like Dog Risk in Helsinki are doing such incredibly important work, because they're doing independent canine nutrition research. So pet parents all around the world are supporting this project and funding this project, so we can get some research about fresh food and the impact that it has on dog health. Until we have those studies, we're going to be, it's not guesswork, right? It's not guesswork, because we've got loads of human studies and studies on other animals that show the benefits of fresh feeding, but we want the dog studies. Like we want to be able to see things like night and day on a piece of paper. So if you are interested in the more kind of scientific side of things, I'd really, really recommend you looking up Dog Risk. They're a group of researchers in Helsinki that put out lots and lots of amazing information when it comes to canine nutrition. The other point was around kidney disease. So the myth was that if you give a greyhound a high protein diet, they will develop kidney disease. So there's no evidence that high protein diets lead to kidney disease as far as I can find it. There are key studies that support this notion, but they use rats rats are different to dogs.
Yeah.
So yeah. So again, like I said, it was a difficult. Like, I've never heard of this one, and I've really spent so long researching this and trying to really. Say that again.
I think you have. And I've been looking for scientific studies. There's been lots going on. I've been making links with greyhound contacts going. Yeah, how do we do with this? So we have completely smashed it. But I do just want to say, if there are people out there that have been following this less than 20% or have advised on it in the past, I know years ago when I was doing home checks, I advised on it. I don't want to knock anyone that has advised on it, because it's just what we think was the best advice at the time we're giving out, and as we know better, we do better. And as I say, the Zoomy Zone, who are a great person to follow if you've got greyhounds, I was talking to them and they're saying on a higher protein diets, ignoring this 20% rule with the dogs, they've seen they've never had an issue with the dogs on that higher protein diet. And in fact, it's improved something called bald thigh syndrome for many dogs, which is quite a big thing in the greyhound world. And in the greyhound world, dogs get known for having a lot of being gassy and stomach upsets and things like that. And I think some of this is because there's poor quality greyhound foods out there with this less than 20% protein, which means if they're not got the protein, they're full of all sorts of other interesting things that are made up, and that the dogs aren't getting the nutrients that they need. So that's lovely. And thank you ever so much.
I think that leads us quite nicely, actually, talking about, unexpected things that are happening when you don't have good nutrition. And I'm not too sure it was much of an issue for greyhounds because their heads are so high up from the ground. But a lot of my clients have this issue where dogs may pick up things from the floor and then get that upset tummies. And so, slightly different reasons. But, often advice is, chicken and rice. Personally, I don't use rice. I did my own research, and I think Carolina, you and I are on the same page on that one. And I use squash or sweet potato and fish or chicken in order to provide a bland tummy up, when a dog's got a tummy upset. But I guess while we got you on live, what's your best recommendation? If a dog's got upset tummy, my girl had an upset tummy only recently, so I know that can be awful when you're in the mix of it. So how do you help somebody with the diet in that sense?
So I think there's a few things to consider before we go into a diet that I would recommend for those moments. So one thing that I notice a lot is people think that it's normal for their dogs to have very large, very stinky, very soft poos. Seems to be that most people don't know what a healthy dog poo actually looks like. So if a dog is constantly having these unhealthy poops, something is going on, and changing to a temporary diet, giving the dog a bit of sweet potato or whatever it might be, that's not going to work in the long term. So if your dog's poo is very large, very stinky, difficult to pick up, and that is happening consistently, something isn't right. So it's not a temporary thing. It's something that you need to think about in more the long term. So you need to think about the quality of the protein that your dog is being fed. You need to think about the quantity of carbs that your dog is being fed. We know, we talked about fresh food and highly processed foods. Regardless of what type of diet your dog is having, if their poo doesn't look healthy, then something could be going on that is more long-term, that is more severe than just a temporary bad tummy. So think about that first. How long has your dog actually had these bad poops? And then if it is a temporary thing, if your dog has been quite healthy, but then all of a sudden they maybe you've bought some new training treats and they haven't agreed, and maybe they've had a little bit of diarrhea or whatever it might be. So my first port of call in those cases, again, where the dog is otherwise healthy, would be fasting. So I'd fast the dog for a day, and just offer the dog some bone broth. So making sure the hydration levels are there. And then you can try to go back on the normal diet. Most dogs, they can actually just go back on their normal diet after a short fast. If you still prefer to do a bit of a bland diet, then normally what I recommend, boiled white fish, pumpkin puree, or sweet potato. So pumpkin puree, there's kind of two supplements that I would always recommend that you have in the house. Pumpkin powder, because it's really good for both loose stools, but also for constipation. So always good to have that in the cupboard to use whenever you need. And then marshmallow and or slippery elm powder. So again, they're really good supplements for digestion. So if you have those two in the cupboard and your dog has a temporary bad tummy, you know that you can fall back on that. Whether you feed those things with their normal diet, or whether you want to do the boiled fish and pumpkin puree, or pumpkin powder and a bit of sweet potato, it's completely up to you. The reason why I wouldn't recommend rice, I know a lot of people say chicken and rice. So rice is considered a complex carb, but it acts as a simple carb. And that is in the sense that it can be digested quite fast, which can create a spike in insulin. So it's a food with a high glycemic index. So if your dog is already got an upset stomach, and then you give them something that is just going to run through them, that's not going to be really conducive to their gut healing. So you want something that is possibly going to be a little bit more like slow release. And then chicken, you could use chicken. You can use chicken. But a lot of people think their dogs are allergic to chicken.
It's more common than you realise, isn't it? Allergies against chicken. I found that.
Yeah, I honestly, the only reason I tend to prefer fish is because most dogs have not had fish before.
Yeah.
Most kibbles don't use fish unless you, of course, buy specifically a fish one. So having a protein that the dog hasn't had before could then help you in terms of that elimination process as well. But again, we're then talking about like a bit more complex cases where you may be doing elimination diets or whatever. But yeah, white boiled fish, I think it's I've never seen a dog that has responded badly to white fish.
Super.
So it tends to be quite a safe one, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I'm going to be buying pumpkins not to make Halloween lanterns, but also to get a freezer full ready because, I mean, I use squash as well as sweet potato. But I think, what better reason to get carving and using all the insides of that pumpkin to make puree ready for, well, God, touch wood, my dogs will be fit and well. But I mean, it's a good time to have this live, isn't it, to tap into that pumpkin.
And save up the seeds as well. Save up those seeds for some natural parasite prevention as well.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That's really helpful. I've seen that before. So we'll get those links out about the food recommendations and share those, Carolina. That's great.
Thank you. Yes. Okay. Another question that came in from one of my members was they're asking about senior dogs, and you see lots of marketing on senior dog food, and when we should be considering switching those foods for a dog, and when they're classed as senior, and if you could give us any information from a nutrition point of view on that topic, that would be great.
Yeah. So when a dog is considered a senior, really depends on the dog's breed and their size. So smaller breeds normally considered senior around 10 to 12 years old, medium breeds about 8 to 9, large or giant breeds around 6 to 7. Again, it really varies. So what I tend to say to people is focus not so much on the age, but actually how your dog is presenting. So do you notice any physical or mental changes that might indicate that your dog is aging? So look at their appearance. Is there white or grey hair on their face or muzzle? Is there any thinning of the fur? Is the fur become more coarse maybe as well? Behavior wise, has the dog really slowed down? Are they maybe having trouble sleeping or sleeping too much? Is there any issues with their hearing? Is any issues with their vision? So for example, are they suddenly struggling to find a toy that you've thrown for them? So look at the dog and their behavior and how they are in themselves, rather than just looking at the age, because again, depending on the dog's diet as well, they might age a lot slower if they're on a fresh diet. They might age a lot faster if they're on a highly processed diet. So you need to consider how the dog presents more so than their age alone. Also looking at things like weight gain, weight loss, gum disease, any teeth decay, arthritis, joint issues, etc., etc. So look at how your dog is presenting, and if you do feel like your dog is maybe slowing down a bit, aging a little bit, then some of the sort of top tips, I suppose, that I could share in terms of keeping them as healthy as possible is don't over-vaccinate. Vaccines can be really, really harsh on the dog system. I don't recommend vaccinating even younger dogs, but certainly not senior dogs. It's just not worth the risk. Try not to use chemicals such as your warming, your flea and tick treatment. Try to use natural preventatives if you can. Try, if possible, to feed a healthy, fresh food diet, homemade diets, gently cooked. You can maybe even heat the food a little bit. So if we look at sort of traditional Chinese medicine, as we age, we cool down. So what we want for an older dog is to warm them up a bit. So warming up the food, you can feed certain proteins that within traditional Chinese medicine are seen as warm proteins. Just bringing in that balance of the yin and yang. I'm not like hugely into the Chinese traditional medicine, but those are the sort of things that I'd be looking at, is bringing a little bit of that warmth, and also keep them physically and mentally active. I think sometimes when the dog starts to age, people start saying, oh, you know, they're too tired, they don't want to go for a walk. But the more the dog stops, the quicker they will really stop. So try to keep them active and get them outside. We don't get a lot of sunshine in the UK, unfortunately, but sunshine is a source of energy again. So get them outside, get them in the sunlight, and make sure that you keep up with your grooming. Check for any bumps and lumps, check their teeth, eye issues, etc. But diet specifically, fresh, gently cooked. I probably wouldn't go raw with a senior dog, just because we want to bring more of that warmth into the diet. So maybe a homemade would be more suitable. But again, really depends from case to case. But yeah, that's what I would say on senior dogs.
So it doesn't sound much like the average sort of recommendation. It's not like you're saying, oh, with a senior dog, we definitely need to be supplementing this, we need to be changing the diet. Because a lot of the marketing would suggest that you sort of change the diet for a senior dog. There's different dog foods out there for an adult dog, a puppy, a senior dog. But from what you're saying, it sort of tweaks rather than...
Yeah, and what you'll find as well is within the processed foods, there's a lot of marketing that goes into it as well. So if you are told, you know, working dog food, golden retriever food, whatever else food, but then you go look at the recipes and they're all the same. So again, if the dog has a health issue, then they might need a specific diet. But if the dog is otherwise healthy, then, you know, supplementation has its place. Supplementation is, what do we need? What does a dog need? And how can we provide that for them? I'm not really a huge fan of just throwing every single supplement at the dog and hoping that something sticks. You know, if the dog's got arthritis, we're going to look at anti-inflammatory supplements. We're going to look at the collagen. We're going to look at all this good stuff that is going to build up and protect those joints as much as possible. Maybe we need to look at some natural pain relief stuff like CBD, but it's depending on the dog's needs. There's no point changing a dog's diet, giving the dog different supplements if they don't need them, and if they're not going to really benefit from them. You're just going to waste your money, really.
That's really interesting, because like you say, the marketing out there is, your dog is 6 to 7, you give them this food. Your dog suddenly has their 7th birthday, you now give them this food. It's yeah, no, that's really interesting. Thank you ever so much.
There's a lot of similarities, aren't there, when you think about, as we get older, you know, our diet changes. You know, I look at my mum, and you know, she doesn't want to eat, you know, the same things, and she wants to eat smaller portions. So, you know, a bit of common sense, I think, Carolina, goes a long way in these things, doesn't it? You know, just thinking about that, you know, what is it that you can identify with, and what's the comparison from a human perspective. And I think, you know, you can't go too far wrong in that sense.
Yeah, smaller portions is a good point that I missed out, actually. So yeah, your senior dog might need smaller portions. They might need feeding, you know, a bit more broken up rather than 1 or 2 meals a day as well. So yeah, that's a really good point as well.
That's great, thank you. So I think we haven't had any questions come in, which is good, because we've chatted away. We're quite over where we wanted to be, but it's been fantastic. Thank you so much for the information, and thank you so much for your time. So if people would like to find out a little bit more about you, Carolina, how can they do that, and where should they go? And we'll put links on their Facebook page.
Yeah, so you can find me on social media at Chewing with River, and my website will be linked on those as well. I'm too cheap, so I haven't bought a domain, so it's one of those squaresite.com type ones, but they're all on social media. And obviously Claire and Sarah will be sending out the links as well, with a copy of the video for the newsletter, so you'll be able to easily reach out to me. What I would say is, if you do have any concerns about your dog's health, please feel free to reach out. I offer a free discovery call, so if you want to jump on the call and ask any questions, you're more than welcome to. And then I do my wellbeing consultations for poorly dogs, where I help you assess your dog's current diet, any symptoms they might be experiencing, and then give you some information about things that you might want to try to improve their well-being. And then for healthy dogs, if you're maybe just looking at changing their diet, I can also put a transition plan together for you, whether you want to change to raw or to gently cooked or whatever other type of diet it is. I can help you in that way. I know that we're super over time, but there's just kind of one final message that I wanted to kind of leave people with, like as your final takeaway, is try to simplify your dog's diet and try to apply that common sense to your dog's diet. So if I have a plate with steak, eggs, a bit of veg, and another plate with KFC, I know which one the healthiest choice is for me.
Sorry, what was the KFC? Oh, KFC was that?
KFC,
as in the takeaway. I didn't know if you were referring to some highly technical term then, but you were actually talking about Kentucky Fried Chicken, just to be really clear.
Yeah. Or, you know, other takeaways and fast foods are available.
That's fine. Might have been with McDonald's rather because there's so many acronyms, aren't there?
If I've got those 2 plates in front of me, I know which one the healthiest choice is. Now, I also know that I could survive just eating the KFC or the McDonald's. And, you know, if you remember years ago when they did that Super Size Me documentary, the guy that ate McDonald's for 30 days, you saw how rapidly his health deteriorated. So he didn't die. He lived, but he didn't thrive. And this is kind of how I compare dog food to people, is your dog can survive on a highly processed diet, but can they thrive? And I think that's where the difference is. And for me, kibble is the fast food of the dog world. Not all kibbles. Some kibbles are obviously better quality than others, but we're talking about your Royal Canons, your pedigrees, etc. bags of flour and rice with a little sprinkle of bone dust. So if you want your dog to thrive, think about what's the healthiest choice that you can make for them. And if you're looking at a kibble, if kibble is the only thing that works for you, look at something with 60+ meat content.
Okay, that's a great.
So if you don't remember anything else from the past hour, just remember that.
Yeah, and then and that's brilliant. And then obviously Claire and I, we've been learning so much through you as well, Carolina. And so if anyone's got any questions, and reach out to us individually, and we can catch up with our clients individually and just follow up on it and make sure that we're doing the best we can for our dogs. They're part of the family, and we treat them likewise.
100%. And just from a personal point of view, I've been interested in canine nutrition for a long time, and we do bits of research here and there, and I've been looking up canine nutritionists a lot over the time, and I've got to admit, so many I've found charge an extortionate amount of money to give you advice, and then you get like a maximum of 3 follow-up emails that you can ask questions. And I have to admit, I've found Carolina through a governing body that we're both a part of, and a professional pet network, and I've been working with her for a while with Izzy, and it's been slow and steady progress with Izzy. She had quite a lot of complex needs, and it's not been an overnight transformation, but the transformation to now to where she was is fantastic. And I have to say, Caroline's offered support throughout that. So as I say, regular send her poo photos, but also questions, and go, she's not quite as good, this is happening, what do I do, and where do I go with this? And the support has just been unbelievable. And Izzy is looking fantastic, talking about coats and everything else. She's in such a different place to where she was. So personally, I can't thank you enough. And I think you've been really kind and generous in the well-being packages that you offer. If any of our customers are interested, you're given a 10% discount code. If they contact myself or Sarah, we can give you that code to get 10% off your well-being package. So thank you so much. And thank you so much for your time today. It's absolutely
thank you so much for having me. I'm so sorry we've gone such over time, but I do hope that anyone watching is taking at least 1 or 2 learning points away from it. And thank you both so much for trusting me with this, and for having me on. It's been really, really nice.
No, you're welcome. I think definitely an opportunity next year, Claire, to get Carolina back again.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to do a part 2. There's so many things we could have talked about. It feels like, probably need you back.
And get poo on the conversation. Yeah, and get poo on the conversation again. I mean, God. And on that cheery note, we'll sign off.
See you soon.
Bye everyone.
Bye. Bye.